Before we get into it, I need to warn you. The topic discussed here may ruffle some feathers, and if you feel the need to click off this video, then clearly you're not ready to hear what needs to be said. Here is a fact to recognize. Regardless of what the masses think, Karl Marx certainly had wild ideas. It's historically relevant that he was also a drunkard. Based on the title of this video, it sounds like I'm going to suggest or argue one way or another. And you'd be somewhat right. The thing is, though, my content isn't about siding with one side or the other. It's about looking into the character in ways people might have missed so we might be able to understand them better. Perhaps it's obvious. My content consists of psychology, sociology, philosophy, economics, and politics. After all, history only becomes more clear when we use the modern world as a reference. Like how I deciphered Hitler, how I discovered two personalities with Stalin. One I'd say is clearly more plausible. Now we are here for Karl Marx. I'll say it out of the gate of what stood out to me. Although he was poor and struggled to make ends meet, Marx did have friends who had money. I argue if he fell into hard times, his friends would bail him out because those same friends shared his views. In fact, he went to a prestigious university, a place where very few could even go. In my opinion, this makes Marx look privileged, despite his financial future. Here is the thing though. We have to remember that at the time, capitalism more or less was the standard. While Germany was politically a monarchy, its economic structure, like Britain and France, increasingly reflected capitalist ideals. The UK was a mix of a constitutional monarchy and capitalism. And France was essentially suffering from an existential crisis, unable to make up its mind of what kind of exploitative government they'd want to be. I'm not saying exploitative like government is inherently designed so, but just merely stating that's how unaccountable governments eventually become. Then again, that might actually be another whole video on its own. Anyway, France had its problems like everyone else. Regardless, Germany, the UK and France were all forms of capitalism. And Marx managed to see it at its absolute worst. How so? Imagine working at a factory, and the standard wage was $0.25 per day. But the thing is, you are one in thousands, cramped into the smallest possible space, repeating the same monotonous routine all day. Worse yet, this is part of the reason why child labor laws exist today, because then, kids as young as 5 were working 80 hours a week at these factories. Women too. A hot take. This exact moment is history being repeated in today, where women are working exploitative, unfulfilling jobs, and worse yet, getting swindled because the machine is by design defective. It only lasts so long until another powerful, charismatic person comes along and tries to fix things, but time and time again fail because they don't target what's inherently the cause. But you also have those types who appear as well, whose only intention is to rule like they're some kind of Karen. In the end, I know women back in the day, in the US, most didn't want equal rights because it would include signing up for the draft and possibly dying in war. But that's neither here or there, because we are here now. Perhaps in another video I'll delve into women's suffrage and uncover something deep we either don't talk about or purposely hide away. Coming back to Marx, and my example. You're a family man of 4, let's just say. And all 4 of you are working 80-hour weeks at a factory. You, your spouse, and your 2 kids, 5 and 8 years old, each making 25 cents a day. At the time, a single dollar bill was a lot of money, and perhaps my example is dramatic somewhat. I'm using examples here to capture the reality of the time, not exact inflation rates or wages. But that's just it, an example. Now when you get home after your shift, what's there to do? You see, this is where I want to connect the dots between how work-life balance was like before then, and during then. Actually, it's twisted how much we can compare it with today's world. How so? Even genuine slaves who worked under nobles and kings back in the medieval times, worked 6 hours a day and less than half the whole year. Compared to the industrial era, many medieval peasants actually labored fewer days per year. Not because life was easy, but because of the seasons, primitive tools, and survival patterns. Farmers? They worked when they could grow food. Otherwise, there was basically no work. Sure, it was hard work, I'm not disregarding that. I'm merely saying at the time they worked significantly less than what humanity has been since. I'd argue the 1700s. How so? Working 80 hours a week at an unfulfilling factory job. getting paid a criminally low wage, working in a society that has no genuine stability in identity or nationality, and the machine designed to exploit hard workers so that a few can live lavish lives selfishly and greedily, especially since they themselves didn't do the work they expect their employees to do, because they know it's exploitation. Worse yet, since the transformation from agrarian culture to industrial, labor went up from half the year because of the seasons to nearly the whole year. Crazy part is, our wages since the 1950s haven't been representative of the cost of living as well as record-breaking profits. And this? This is why Karl Marx was a genuine visionary. Despite his alcoholic addiction and health crisis, he was a revolutionary. Communism and socialism don't exist because he thought it up. They exist because the minority of people chose to exploit the masses to achieve and maintain a standard of utopian abundance showered with immense and immeasurable scales of wealth and power. If the minority of people didn't exploit the masses, I argue, socialism and communism that we are so viciously against would have never been conceived. When injustice becomes the normal way of life, revolution becomes the only option left. On the flip side, he very well could have been just some drunk who imagined a fairy tale of a perfect society in a sense. His connections and friends who had wealth could be easily been manipulating the poor Marx into coming up with a new form of control and exploitation. And that's something I want to consider in this section. What if what we think or know about the Communist Manifesto is actually a forgery of its true intended design? What do I mean? I mean, we can figure in good faith Marx came up with the manifesto to benefit the working class. Or worse, it became a blueprint. Whether by accident, corruption, or a plan we'll never fully know to consolidate power, silence alternative voices, and further hoard immense wealth for themselves, leaving undignified slaves as shadows of their humanity, mindless automatons, or husks of life. But then we quickly noticed a contradiction. What is that, you ask? The official narrative depicts the Communist Manifesto as dangerous because they crush freedom, destroy prosperity, and inevitably turn into bloody dictatorships. Mainly that take is including Marxism, socialism, and communism. When I was growing up, I learned at a young age that communism has two types. One is where it's ruled by the elites, as it's laid out for us. And the other is more of a community, where the people are not only independent but dependent on each other. In truth, what communism is depicted as is far from the genuine truth. Why? Capitalist society fights communists because the communists would take their hard-earned livings and consolidate it, while communists criticize capitalism for claiming to decentralize prosperity. But in reality, wealth flows upward and consolidates all the same. Crazy thing is, this is laughably predictable because, even in our capitalist country, the US, the wealthy, are extracting wealth from the working and the poor for their own lavish lifestyles, to control through means of materialism and financials. In a way, we already live in a perverted version of Marxist regime because it's, in quotations, American workers who own these big companies, who hoard wealth, consolidating wealth more and more. And they influence the elections because money. The truth. What is the real truth between capitalism versus Marxism? I genuinely believe Marx had great ideas, but his ideas failed to take into account one thing: human behavior. How so? Because humanity is so easily corruptible and otherwise ends up corrupting. Unfortunately, this is simply human behavior. We are seemingly by design chaotic. This is mainly tied between the yin-yang because you can't have good without evil, and vice versa. So the truth between capitalism and Marxism, it's not what you'd think. It's as simple as this: human behaviorism. The type of governance isn't inherently corrupt or evil, only those who use it to push everyone else beneath them. Marxism so far works only in theory, because so far we've only seen bad actors such as Hitler, Mao, and Stalin. But here is a solid question. What is likely to happen to the US if it becomes socialist? Well, it's obvious. The person in power will likely be an elite, and he and his buddies will rule over you again. Just this time it's with a different mask. So if America were to become socialist, America's best leader would be a non-vindictive slave who has had the taste of power, but isn't controlled by it, and has absolute purity and pride, nationalism, and populism. A slave who is willing to pull the trigger when it's necessary. Karl Marx saw the system, and it was broken. You can't fix what was meant to be defective. And so he knew you had to reform it entirely. As a result, we need to take control over our lives like some of the Gen Z today. Because we bear shackles by choice, because we allow it to chain us. Karl Marx saw that, and they demonized him not for what he did, but for what others did with his ideas. When people blame Marx for the crimes Mao, Hitler, and Stalin did, we point fingers at thought. If Marx never created Marxism, genocide would have never happened. What an ignorant claim. I suppose if people are going to say this, then violent kids are a result from violent video games. If this is the case, then US aid wasn't stealing taxpayer dollars. Hey you! Hit subscribe! And don't forget to turn on the bell notification for your daily upload alerts. Give it a share. Leave a like and make a comment.